Well, thank you very much. And may I say what a pleasure it is to know that the floor is indeed mine for a little while, but above all, to be with all of you. And I'm so grateful to the SMMT for having invited me to address what is an absolutely crucial event. And of course, it's taking place during a crucial year to be talking about our collective aim to reach net zero. And we're emerging, as you all know, from the coronavirus pandemic into really the make or break decade for meeting the target of reaching net zero. The United Nations has been clear. We have less than 10 years to avert the worst impacts of catastrophic climate change. And all eyes will be on the UK later this year when we host the COP26 summit and seek to accelerate progress towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. Getting there will require all of us to play our part. And so many are already doing so. Households up and down the country have changed their behaviour from recycling waste to reducing their energy use. Whole industries, especially automotive, have been making fundamental changes to their business models, with more to come. And government has its part to play too, setting the direction for others to follow, incentivising the right behaviour, and yes, disincentivising those who hold back or drag their feet. We need a huge collective effort, an effort of the type we've seen at times during the last 12 months. The coronavirus crisis has been an appalling shock to our country, with the most devastating health and economic consequences. But our collective response has also demonstrated the power of coming together. We've seen this in the inspirational partnership between Oxford University and AstraZeneca in developing a vaccine at astonishing speed. And in the ventilator challenge, of course, where the Centre for Advanced Manufacturing worked with major manufacturers, trade unions and government. And they all delivered the seemingly impossible to record time. That experience provides many valuable lessons about the power of joint working, about the power of an active and enterprising government working with business and trade unions in a new spirit of partnership. We should hold on to those lessons as we emerge from this crisis and consider how we can better tackle the present climate crisis and future additional crises. But those lessons are already at risk of being lost. In the last few weeks, we've seen the UK's industrial strategy mothballed, a strategy which brought business together with government to develop long-term plans for different sectors. The Industrial Strategy Council has been actively disbanded. Instead, we need a government ready to take the bold action needed to set us on the path both to post-crisis growth and to net zero, working with business to achieve this. But it feels sometimes like what we've got in the UK instead is a government in retreat, a government that cut £500 million from planned capital spending in the latest budget, when our international peers rightly see the virtue of wise public investment to stimulate growth. A government whose flagship scheme to promote retrofitting and renewable energy sources for households has failed so miserably it's actually costing jobs. And rather than trying to fix it and get it back on track, the Chancellor slashed its budget and left it to wither and die. A government whose response to the challenge of increasing the take-up of electric vehicles is to cut the plug-in grants that would help people to buy and run new cars. That lack of aspiration contrasts woefully with the appetite I know there is in industry and amongst the general population to harness the power of green technologies. I was privileged to attend the launch of the new electric Mini, built in my own constituency of Oxford East at the BMW Cowley plant, just 5 minutes down the road from where I'm speaking to you from today. I know how proud the workforce are of what they've created. It's a pride I've also seen reflected when I visited the LEVC factory in Coventry. And our country needs a government with similar self-confidence and determination to set out a vision for our critical industries and our economy as a whole, and a path to get there. We haven't seen that confidence and determination over the last 10 years, and we don't see it now, I would argue. 10 years ago, the then coalition government published a plan for growth. However, since the publication of that plan, UK growth has dropped below the OECD average. Our trade balance has worsened. Levels of foreign direct investment have halved. We've fallen down the World Bank's ratings for ease of doing business. We have the highest level of skills mismatch in the G7. Apprenticeship starts have collapsed. And we have a £70 billion investment gap compared to the rest of the G7. Most starkly of all, the Office for Budget Responsibility has illustrated just how far off the mark Conservative-led governments have been in their ambitions for growth. Back in 2011, the OBR looked ahead 15 years and set out what they thought the economy would look like based on the government's plans. The result is an economy set to be £300 billion smaller by 2026 than the OBR had originally forecast. That's every person in the country being £4,500 worse off. We need to be far more ambitious for our country's potential than simply reiterating pledges from 2011, many of which still haven't been delivered. We deserve a government that's ambitious for the future of our country and understands that what businesses need more than anything right now is certainty and stability. That's why Labour Shadow Business Secretary Ed Miliband this morning set out 3 crucial ways in which Labour would give manufacturers and consumers alike the confidence that's needed for a mass rollout of electric vehicles. By accelerating the rollout of charging infrastructure right across the country and supporting new jobs in the process. By making electric vehicle ownership more affordable through a combination of interest-free loans for those on low incomes and a scrappage scheme. And by government partnering with private investors to guarantee 3 new gigafactories by 2025, so that batteries are made right here in the UK and we secure the supply chain. We know that by providing clear forward guidance to investors and businesses alike, government can lay the groundwork for the private sector to innovate, to flourish, to create more jobs and transition to net zero. That strategic, long-term approach is at the heart of how a Labour government would approach economic policy. Labour's horizon for economic policy would not end after 5 years. Instead, I would be aiming 10 and ideally 20 years from now, so that we can take the difficult and necessary choices today that would lead to greater security and prosperity in the future. We would also focus on how every level of government can work together with business, trade unions and local communities to ensure we see economic growth right across our country. That's a very different strategy to the current one, where town is pitted against town in bidding for pots of cash doled out by ministers in Whitehall, and where businesses and local authorities have invested time, money and energy in drawing up regional industrial strategies, only for the whole exercise to have apparently been dropped by government earlier this month. We should use the power of government in a new partnership with business, trade unions and communities to maximise the potential of every part of the country, so that wherever public money is invested, we see genuine commitment to the use of local businesses in the supply chain and to the creation of local jobs and training opportunities. We do not need here to remake the wheel. And I realise I'm saying that to an audience of automotive manufacturers, but we don't have to remake the wheel here. That kind of strategic approach to innovation has already often been in evidence in Labour-run Wales, London, Manchester and elsewhere. That type of concerted action is only possible if the government of the day truly believes it can make a difference. If government recognises the part it can and must play in setting targets and enabling businesses, trade unions, communities and individuals to come together to meet them. Today we're talking about the most important target of all, a target that's existential. That requires a government that is up to the task, and I can assure you that a Labour government would be. Thank you.
Anneliese Dodds, thank you very much. There we are. I didn't even try to interrupt. It'll never catch on. Thanks a lot for talking to us. There is actually one question, if you wouldn't mind, that is not from me, but it's an interesting one from Tristan Shale-Hester from Auto Express. And it's a question actually that harks back to something we have been talking about during the course of the day. And it's this business of the shortfall that there is eventually going to be in the government coffers as a result of EV adoption, and how that is then paid for. So his question is, would a Labour government make up for the fuel duty and vehicle excise duty revenue lost by using a pay per mile road pricing model, or are there other models that attract themselves to you? What's your thinking about that at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we look at the tax system as a whole, actually as an overall proportion of tax revenue. Duties such as those coming from fuel, and of course we do have relatively high taxation of fuel in the UK compared to other OECD countries, at least for automotive fuel. That proportion overall of the tax bill is relatively small. You know, the really major big ticket items when it comes to government revenue are things like, for example, income tax, national insurance, and VAT. So actually the proportion currently of those taxes that some people might describe, and duties that some people might describe as being environmentally focused, is relatively small as an overall proportion of taxation. But that doesn't mean, however, that I think we can be completely sanguine about this. We obviously do need to ensure that we have stable public finances into the future. I would say, of course, immediately that means that we need much stronger growth so that we have a stronger tax base, and that seems to have been lost a lot of the time in the discussions around revenue, particularly related to the budget that just took place. We do need also then to be investing so that we can actually be reducing the need for consumption spend into the future. You know, the high cost of housing obviously creating knock-on impacts for the need for revenue. But then we do need to be looking at the future of some of those really critical areas of revenue, including environmentally focused taxes. And we're all awaiting, I think, with bated breath, the net zero review that the Treasury said that it would be committing itself to, and which has still not been published. I think it's really important that it sets out the kinds of principles that will need to be used in looking at some of these questions for the future. Because actually, if you look at some of the areas that have been mooted previously around additional forms of taxation, particularly around, for example, taxation of domestic fuel, I mean, very obviously that would hit many families who would be struggling otherwise. I mean, we have some examples of that kind of per mile approach already in the UK. If you would be looking at, for example, congestion charges, I mean, obviously they're levied in relation to people crossing into those areas rather than having that distance component. And we do have some already fee-paying, of course, stretches of motorway in the UK. But I think that distributional impact would be very, very important to look at in the future of any of these types of revenue garnering mechanisms. I don't think there's any simple approach to this. There's no silver bullet. But I do think we would need to have a system that, you know, work distributionally, but also, of course, that work for British business and for that drive towards net zero.
Yeah, it is a fascinating question. One of many we have faced and looked at today. Anneliese Dodds, thank you so much for spending the time to talk to people down the line today.